Who doesn't love a good Aussie native kangaroo paw plant? The only problem is that they don't flower all year round. Well, most of them don't. There is a variety that I'll talk about later in this video that quite literally does flower all year round. In this video, I'll also tell you when to expect their blooms, how to increase their abundance of blooms, and how to extend their flowering timeline. Most kangaroo paws typically flower from late winter through to summer, with the peak blooming period usually occurring in spring. However, the exact timing can depend on factors such as the specific variety of kangaroo paw, the local climate, and your care practices. So that means that usually you're only going to get a few months of colour and food for pollinators from your kangaroo paws in your garden. As the flowers are pollinated, or they reach the end of their allotted time, they're going to begin to dry and then potentially go to seed. At this point, they'll sadly no longer have that beautiful colour and they're going to probably need to be pruned out. Removing these dead heads encourages the plant to push out new blooms. Once a flower spike has begun blooming, it generally lasts for several weeks before going to seed. Again, this depends on the specific variety and your conditions. For kangaroo paws to flower at their best, they really do require certain conditions. They generally love full sun, well-drained soil, and a mild to warm climate. Make sure they're planted in an area that receives at least 6 hours of direct sunlight each day, and for the soil, give them a sandy or a loamy type that drains well. Overly wet soil can lead to root rot and other diseases, and if your garden has clay-dominant soil, consider growing kangaroo paws in raised beds or pots filled with a suitable potting mix. You can also amend heavy clay with gypsum and organic matter to increase that drainage, but not all kangaroo paws will ever thrive there. They aren't usually frost tolerant, but they can survive in cooler areas as long as they do receive plenty of that sunshine and protection during those frosty periods. They don't usually like humidity either, except for a few cultivated varieties that I'll touch on shortly, which have been shown to do well in Brisbane. If they're all bunched in too closely together, that airflow can't get around the leaves and then they may get some black spot on them. So keep them separate and ensure they get lots of airflow around the leaves. Remember, they're from the deserts in Western Australia. Watering, fertilising, and pruning out deadheads all play an important role in encouraging fresh blooms. Watering should be done deeply but infrequently to allow the soil to dry out between waterings. This mimics the conditions in their native Western Australian habitats and encourages them to develop deep root systems. Just make sure the water's actually reaching deeply into the soil instead of just rolling off the top, which can happen in hydrophobic or compacted soils. You can test this by pushing your finger into the soil after watering to make sure that there's water getting in below the soil surface. Hydrophobic sand can be amended with wetting agents and organic matter, while compacted clay can be amended with gypsum and organic matter. Fertilise your kangaroo paws with a slow release fertiliser at the beginning of the growing season to give them a nutrient boost. Most kangaroo paws can deal with a regular nutrient ratio of NPK, however some sources recommend using a native fertiliser for black kangaroo paws. It's a myth that all native plants need native fertiliser. Keep an eye out for common problems such as ink disease, which presents as a blackening of the leaves. If you spot this, cut off the affected parts, make sure you're getting lots of airflow around those plants, and also water only in the morning. That way evaporation can occur during the day rather than sitting on the leaves all night long, which encourages fungal issues like that. In fact, avoid getting water on the leaves as much as possible at all. Here are 3 of the best kangaroo paws to ever grow in urban areas. Regal Velvet Anigazanthos. This kangaroo paw has red-green flowers up to 1.4 meters tall. It has dense, clean foliage and is more ink spot resistant. It's great at outcompeting weeds, and compared to other kangaroo paws, it requires much less trimming and is also much tougher. Its stunning red flowers with green highlights reach up to 1 to 1.4 meters tall. Use it in mass planting, pots, and low-maintenance gardens. Plant it in full sun in well-draining soil. It works really well in New South Wales, ACT, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, and in Queensland. However, once you start going further north than Brisbane, it starts to get a bit shorter lived, so it might only live 2 to 3 years in North Queensland. Ruby Velvet Anigazanthos. Ruby Velvet kangaroo paws are smaller with clean, compact foliage that reaches 30 to 40 centimeters. They have an abundance of bold red flowers that reach to 70 to 80 centimeters high and can be positioned in full sun in well-drained soils. They tolerate frost and drought but just avoid wet feet. They work really well in New South Wales, ACT, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, WA, and in Queensland. They last ages in Brisbane, but if you go too far north into Queensland, it starts to get a bit humid and they may only last 2 or 3 years. And now for the kangaroo paw we've all been waiting for, the one that flowers all year round, everlasting Mega Gold Anigazanthos. This is a mid-sized, longer-lived kangaroo paw that also gets far less black spot in comparison to shorter-lived kangaroo paws, but this one has large gold flowers all year round, except in colder climates where it won't flower in the winter months. It is, however, tolerant of frost and drought. Its flowers reach 90 centimeters to a meter high, and it wants to be planted in full sun. But it will also live in heavy soils as long as you avoid wet feet. Plant this kangaroo paw in New South Wales, ACT, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, or Queensland. It can be a bit shorter lived when you go too far north into Queensland, where you can expect it to live about 2 to 3 years. So now you understand how kangaroo paws flower, what their flowering timeline is, and you know the best varieties to plant in your garden. Now get planting so that you can introduce some colour, interest, and pollinating insects and birds into your space. Share this video with someone who you know would love to learn more about kangaroo paw flowers. If you're a landscape architect, I can present to your team and tell you all about the oldest and the latest plants that we've bred at Ausbreed and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Email me at horticulture@ausbreed.com.au.